What's up YouTube, ODST General back again, and today guys, I am excited to show to you a video with a interview of the head developer behind Starship Simulator, Dan Govier. So we sat down for about an hour to talk about Starship Simulator and some of the background development behind it. So we did this over on Twitch. Unfortunately, didn't get too many viewers because someone here does not pay enough attention to their Twitch. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. If you guys have any questions, let us know down in the comments below, and we will have a link to their Discord in the information section for this video, so check that out too. Alright guys, thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the end of the video. Alright, take it easy guys. So again, everybody who couldn't hear before, I'm here with Dan Govier, the driving force and the head and currently pretty much only developer for Starship Simulator. Dan, thank you again for joining me.
You're welcome.
So again, I know you already introduced yourself once and kind of talked about yourself, but could you again tell everybody kind of how you got started?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been playing with games ever since I was very young. I wrote my first program actually on the Commodore 64 when I was 5 years old. I used to copy code down from input magazines. But I didn't really start designing something like this until I was at school. So it's sort of in the late 90s, I was writing down gameplay mechanics and ideas and designing how a starship should enter a system from a distance. I guess I grew up playing Elite, so I was kind of, my ideas were sort of colored by that and influenced by that a little bit. And I've always been fascinated with starships and space and engineering, and I really wanted to really kind of delve into what it would be like to build a starship. And I actually started off by building the Enterprise refit from Star Trek, and I was looking at the physical framework, the structure of the ship, the electrical systems, and how we would build that for real if we were really building it. And that really kind of led into this, where I thought, well, why don't I do that? Why don't I actually design my own starship and really go through the motions of designing how it would be constructed, where it would be built, how the electrical system would work in the real world using real world systems. And that's really kind of what we've got here today.
And yeah, we again already talked about this a little bit, but there's wires running throughout the ship. There's HVAC, again, like I said, gravity plating, and there's a whole bunch of systems, and they actually essentially function like they really would. And you actually need these systems for the ship to function properly, or at least you will. So if you don't have your electrical power going through correctly, you'll lose lighting and other systems and stuff like that. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. So part of the process of designing this ship, and I've designed it and kind of taken a step back and then designed it again, and throughout the whole process, I've been doing a lot of research on real world naval vessels. So I've been looking at the construction of from cargo ships up to naval cruisers and submarines, and looking at how those ships are built using the latest in modern techniques that we have today, and then projecting that forward 200 years and having a think about how would those techniques naturally develop over time, and when we get to the point where we are building things in orbit, how would that work? So I've gone down the lines of using an automated welding process where, just like in the real world, ships are built using blocks. So you've got a large steel framework for one piece of the ship, and then all the different pieces are built in isolation, and then they're all welded together at the end. And this ship's been built in the same way. And around B deck, where there's no floor, you can actually see some of those weld lines. And the electrical system is the same. So I was researching the electrical engineering used on cargo vessels. There was a lot of really good videos I found from a crew that did a big container ship, and they did a lot of videos on how the engine room worked and how the electrical systems worked, and how the ground power was hooked up, and how the diesel generators supplied electricity across the ship. And I found all of that really valuable in designing the systems for the Magellan class. So all of the electrical systems are analogous to their real world counterparts. They work the same way because ultimately electric is electric, and whether it's in 200 years or not, the same principles are going to be the same. So yeah, so they every system on the ship is very much a real world system.
And obviously we talked about the ship, and it's very realistic, but that doesn't necessarily tell us kind of about, I guess, the core concept of the game. And again, this is something that you were kind enough that we talked about before we had all these audio issues, or while we were having all the audio issues. So if you could just kind of go over again the general concepts behind the game once players hop in, I guess kind of what other games it takes inspiration from, or because obviously it's kind of natural for people to draw comparisons to other titles, and that's something I've seen a lot of different titles where people compare this to, and you're seeing a lot of big ones like Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous, but there's a whole bunch of titles I've seen people kind of compare this to. So where do you take inspiration from, and what would you say this is kind of closest to, or people can expect to do in game?
Yeah, definitely. I guess the inspiration is quite wide. I'm a big fan of Babylon 5, and some of the combat ideas are from that. Um, Obviously, I'm a Star Trek fan. I think that's clear in some of the designs on the ship. Um, but I also love Star Wars, and I love sci-fi in general. So I think you can find different aspects from different sci-fi shows, in the ships, the look and feel and the way I've done things. Um, and yeah, and with other games, I grew up playing Elites. That was probably the first game I ever got into as a child. Um, and I always wanted to explore a real world galaxy, so that's why I built one for the game. Um, I guess you could compare it to Pulsar a little bit. It's very similar in that regard. Um, I think if I had to describe what other games it was like, I would say if you take the real time galaxy from Space Engine and the way you can move around the galaxy and fly through the nebulas in real time, and then you put that in Elite Dangerous, but then you take the ship interiors from Star Citizen. That's sort of what we're building here. It's that AAA niceness from Star Citizen, but with the full galaxy and scientific accuracy of Elite Dangerous, with some other games thrown in here and there.
And yeah, you kind of already talked about combat a little bit here again. Now that we've started recording again, you've kind of compared it to like galleons fighting and stuff like that. So when ships are going through, it's not going to be like a dogfight and a fighter like you'd expect in some other games, but more so you're going to be targeting, ships of interest, stuff like that. Is what you were saying? Can you kind of get into that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. So the analogy I used was an episode from Babylon 5 where the humans met the Minbari for the first time, and they were scanning the Minbari cruiser, and they didn't know anything about it, and all they had were these energy signatures, and some of them were spiking, and they didn't know why, and they incorrectly assumed that the ship was going to fire on them, and that made me think about if you did encounter an alien vessel, you wouldn't know anything about it. You wouldn't know what was a weapon and what was a shield generator. All you would see is just energy signatures. And it's going to work the same way in StarSim. So when you do encounter an alien vessel, you're not going to immediately know anything about it. It's just going to be, here's the target, here are the energy signatures. You can perhaps logically conclude that the high powered energy signature at the back is probably the engines. Um, but your science team on the ship, as you skill them up through research and discoveries while you're exploring the galaxy, the more skilled and high level your science team become, the more they'll be able to identify what these different energy signatures are. So on the UI for the tactical officer, where you have an energy signature, they'll say something like, "There's a 75 or 80% confidence that this is a weapon, or this is a shield generator." So the different departments, the different systems will all organically tie into one another for that purpose.
All right, and so yeah, and obviously, one of the questions I asked you before is how players can expect to be hampered during their exploration. And obviously, we've covered now, aliens and the fact that there is going to be combat. You're going to have alien ships attacking you. We talked a little bit before about potentially getting boarded if your ship is disabled. But another thing you had mentioned was the fact that the ship is going to take wear and tear as the players explore the galaxy. Could you kind of elaborate more on that and kind of how players are going to have to deal with that as they go through and what sort of ramifications that might have in the long term exploration of the game?
Sure. Well, the game will have a survival aspect to it, but not in an extreme way. So it's not going to be hardcore survival. It's going to be sort of survival light. So your character will need to eat, but only once a day. The same with the NPC crew. Um, it's a reason to get players and NPCs into the mess hall, interacting with the ship as a whole. Um, and as the ship flies around, it will also require various different types of fuel. So, for example, you've got deuterium and helium-3 for the fusion reactor, along with liquid nitrogen for cooling. And these will all be consumables which will run out. And if you're running full power on the reactor, going full speed with the FTL, um, right now, off the top of my head, the number's 100 light years. So every 100 light years, you would need to then find a gas giant, skim the cloud layers, replenish your helium-3 and deuterium, and then continue on your way. But at the same time, components will be taking wear and tear. And if you're pushing everything full throttle, then things will take wear and tear more quickly. And those will constantly require repair. And because some things will break completely, you will then need resources to replace those items using 3D printers, and that again will be a resource usage. So there will be various bins of various elements that will need to be replenished, and that will be done through asteroid mining or finding some other resource in space that you can harvest. So it's very much like the ship is a mobile base of operations. It's your home among the stars, and you've got to look after it in order to keep it up and running.
Now, in terms of obviously there's a lot of stuff that goes into the actual maintenance of the ship and everything. Now, in terms of actually mining and stuff, people will have to leave the ship to get that using shuttles and stuff like that. Now, will that be something players can do, or will that be something that's AI driven? And how will those resources go about to actually getting repaired in the system? Will there have to be any intermediate steps once you actually have the minerals and stuff from these asteroids and various other locations?
So the idea is that in the shuttle bay there will be different craft for different purposes. So you'll have a troop transport, or just rather just a crew transport, a shuttle, for boarding either derelict stations or derelict alien craft. But there'll also be repair vehicles and specifically a mining vehicle. So the mining vehicle will have all the tools and equipment on it needed for mining asteroids, and it will have its own storage bins for the materials that you mine. And then when you get back to the ship and land in the shuttle bay, you'll need to connect the shuttle to various extraction devices, which will then transfer those materials into the ship's main storage bins. And then from that point, those resources can then be used across the ship for whatever the ship needs. Um, that's obviously quite far down the line because we haven't even got to the shuttle bay yet. And some resources will be physicalized, so you'll have physical cargo canisters on the mining vessel. You'll need to pick them up and move them. Um, Either you can do that yourself as a player, or the NPCs will pick it up if it's in their task list. And that will be the same for pretty much everything. Players and NPCs will be working alongside one another all the way, no matter what the task is. And they're just a resource to be used like other things on the ship. And the less NPCs you have, the more work you have to do yourself. So you need to make sure you keep them around.
So if I'm a really bad manager who likes to micromanage everything, I could take some of those resources and put them on the bridge, and then lock the doors to the bridge so that I can watch very closely everybody who accesses some of those supplies if I wanted to.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I remember someone asked a few weeks back, what was the capacity of the cargo holds. Well, the ship has a cargo hold, two, one either side of the shuttle bay. Um, but because the cargo is physicalized, you could literally line the corridors with crates if you so desired. So really, it's however much you can physically fit on the ship is how much cargo it can carry. So if you wanted to fill your crew quarters with a certain mineral, then you could.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to kind of jump back into to ship customization here, and this is again something we talked about before we started running into audio issues, and
Mhm.
uh, obviously this is again something that you've been working on very recently here. In fact, the last patch you just overhauled the ship interiors a fair bit, and obviously it's still work in progress. But next you're also going to be focusing on the customization of uh, characters and player models and stuff like that. Can you
Yep,
talk a bit about how that will extend to how far players can kind of expect to customize their ship when all is said and done, and I guess their crew too?
sure. Well, there's a few more things to go yet in terms of the internal customization. Um, Things like the trim material on the wall panels, the edging on the floor, the step material. Because right now, because the wooden trim is kind of set in place, a lot of player customization designs just don't work with it, or it looks a bit silly. So I'm quite keen to add that to the customization pool as well. Um, Ultimately, we want players to be able to completely customize the ship, so they can make it their own, which is why you can change the name, the carpets, the walls, the lighting. You can really just express yourself however you want in the ship's design. Some aspects of it, I've decided to make not customizable. For example, the various alert modes, because I want those to be iconic and consistent across all ships. So red alert on one ship is going to be the same on another, or rather, it'll be general quarters. So we're going to again, just like with everything else, it's all going to be um, real world systems, real world uh, military practices. So we'll have general quarters, which will be a different alert from, say, abandoned ship, or there's a fire, etc., etc. But again, I want that to be consistent across all ships, so no one gets confused. And when it comes to the uniforms, um, probably similar. That's still undecided at this point. But we do want the uniforms to be somewhat iconic. So we don't want people running around with bright blue trousers and horrendous green, luminous green tops. So we don't want to go so far as so people can create these crazy clown characters. Because I've seen some really horrendous customization options, which I wished I'd put a bit of a limit on it, but but it's fine. People can have their crazy neon ships.
Yeah, I was gonna say the pastel colors for the ships have seemed pretty popular so far.
Yeah, yeah. I, Honestly, some of the designs that people have come up with have been absolutely stunning. Um, Far better than I came up with originally. In fact, um, and it's great to see. I love seeing what people come up with for their internal designs, and some of them, yeah, some of them are amazing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people do over time, especially with new and more options added. But
Now,
with the
oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the actual character customization, it's going to be things like name, rank, role, um, mission patch, country patch, hair color, hairstyle, various facial features, skin tone, the usual things you'd expect really from a character customization. But with the country patch on the arm, is actually going to be any country that has an official flag will be included. So that should cover everybody.
Now, as far as your AI crew and stuff go, there's various games like XCOM and stuff where it really lets you customize your characters and truly make, the people under you that you can man your own. Can we expect name customization and stuff like that, and the ability to customize basically everything you could with a player, also working for the AI as something you can manage?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that's probably going to work is that the captain will have a terminal on their desk, and you'll be able to do captain's logs and things. But also, in addition to that, you'll be able to manage the crew roster. And I also like the idea of using the big screen in the conference room for that as well. So you'll be able to go through the crew, rename them, change their bios, maybe write a bit of roleplay background about them. So all of that will be completely configurable.
So, kind of staying on the topic of the crew, but shifting gears a little bit, something you talked briefly about is your crew having skill levels, like your science team having a skill level. So, you've talked about sending probes out and getting alien artifacts and stuff like that as well. Could you kind of explain what progression will look like and what differences a player who's just starting versus one who's maybe, been exploring for, 6 months? What sort of differences those players might expect to see?
Sure, sure. So the law behind the game is that this is mankind's first ever experimental deep space exploration craft. So before this ship, the FTL technology wasn't really breaking light speed. So it was great for traveling around the solar system, but beyond that wasn't really feasible. So following a breakthrough in that technology, this ship was developed. So when you leave Earth and you go out exploring for the first time, um, it's all very basic, and everything is basically tech level one. Now, as you explore and discover new elements and new technologies, you'll be able to upgrade various aspects of the ship. For example, how efficient the engines are, how powerful the engines are. Same with the weapons and the shields and the various other systems across the ship. And those upgrades will have skill level associated with them, or rather a tech level associated with them. Now, in order for you to make use of those, then your science team is going to have to be of an equivalent level in order to be able to figure those things out. And you'll skill that science team up by having them do analysis on objects you retrieve from planetary services by way of probes. So you'll send down a probe, retrieve. It could be a plant, it could be a mineral, it could be a fish, it could be anything, and they'll do analysis on that and get skill points from doing so. And as you explore, you'll encounter alien species of any tech level from 1 to 1,000, and some of them will be below you, and others will be so far advanced of you that they're just you're insects to them. And there could be a hostile alien species which drives you out of their system with your tail between your legs. But then perhaps a while later, after you've skilled your teams up, you've improved your ship, you could go back and bring retribution upon them. So the difference between a new player and someone who's been playing a while is that their ship's going to be far more developed, with a much higher tech level and a much more skilled crew.
Now that I guess that leads to a couple of other questions for me. Now, with terms of these artifacts and stuff that you bring onto your ship, like you said, they're going to lead to upgrades for the ship itself. Can we expect to see any physical changes to the ship that would signify some of these upgrades that players have gotten that have kind of made their ship unique, not only just by their decision to customize it, but by how far they've progressed into the game?
Yeah, one of the things that sprung to mind was the hull plating. So if you find a better mineral, for example, to turn into hull plating, then because each sheet of hull plating is going to be a separate object, as you upgrade them, you'll be replacing them. So you'll have this like patchwork hull while you go through the process of upgrading it with different materials. And each material will have a different color associated with it. So physically, your ship will look different as you replace the hull plating. Um, the same with things like sensors or anything external on the ship that you upgrade will look different in some way, depending on what it was that upgraded it.
And the other thing I wanted to ask is that we've talked about your science skill team once they've retrieved an object and the ability to utilize that. But another thing you've talked about in terms of that is that if they're not high enough level, you may not be actually using what you think you're using. There may be negative effects that you're not aware of if your team's not of satisfactory level to actually uh, research that object. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the whole thing's going to be percentage based, and when you have an object and you hand it over to the science team, they will come back after a period of time with their report on that object, and they'll say with X percentage confidence, we believe this item is this and that it's good for this. Now, if their confidence is low, they could be wrong and say it's a plant, and they're saying that this could be a really good food replacement for the crew. And then you decide to use that plant instead of the one you're currently using, and all of a sudden all the crew's getting sick because in fact it's poisonous, and they missed the fact that it was poisonous because it was too high of a tech level for their particular skill level at the time. Or, and we got a good example of this, um, it could have an alien virus in a piece of technology which they didn't pick up during the analysis. So you've gone ahead and used that technology, and now your ship's infected with an alien virus, which one of the science team members will then have to try and purge from the ship's computer. So there will be cause and effect.
Is there any chance of picking up an object that will transfer us to an alternate lifetime where we learn to play a ancient alien instrument by chance?
I'm going to still steer well clear of anything that could cause a problem.
Fair enough. Um, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about accessibility. Now, you've already got colorblind modes and stuff like that into the game.
Mhm.
I actually think you just implemented the ability to invert the controls. Any
Yes.
plans to change key bindings and have other accessibility options added as you progress?
Yeah, well, in terms of medical accessibility, well, you just saw them with all the lights flashing. I'm going to add a no flashing lights mode. So you'll be able to disable any kind of, at least in terms of the FX flashing lights. There'll be some things we can't really do anything about, but hopefully nothing will just flash generally on the ship when that mode is enabled. And then beyond that, yes, keybinds are definitely coming. I'm just waiting on the next release of Unreal Engine 5.1, which is it's got a much more bedded in version of the control system.
Okay, and then sticking kind of on the topic of accessibility, I want to switch over to peripherals, which uh, I know you've talked a little bit about some of these, but you had plans for flight sticks and VR. Is there any chance of, I've seen a few people ask about this, head tracking and other stuff like that?
I don't see a need for head tracking specifically. Um, it's difficult to see where that could really be employed, but VR definitely. I think this game is really crying out for a VR support, and I absolutely do want to walk around the ship in VR. Um, all of the control surfaces are already physicalized, so adding VR is not going to be an issue because you can literally just press the buttons on the control panels. Um, and yes, HOTAS support for the helm, absolutely. So throttle, stick, absolutely. But they'll only work while you're sat at the helm.
Okay, and then yeah, and you've kind of talked a little bit about it just now, but with terms of VR, some of the VR has actually designed or influenced the ship design to this point. So, and that's part of the reason you have physicalized buttons all over the ship is to make it easier to interact in VR. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Well, twofold really. Again, so going back to the ship being a real vessel, you'll notice that at no point do you ever have to open up a menu to do anything. And that's because every single ship's function is physicalized, just like it would be in the real world. We don't get pop-up menus in the real world, so you won't get that on the ship either. And that just by coincidence just lends itself to VR as well, because that's a very one-to-one physical interaction. So I want every single interaction with the ship to be physical on the ship. So there shouldn't be anything taking you out of the ship at any point.
Okay, and I have to ask you another question, kind of changing gears here again. And
Mhm.
I feel kind of bad about having to ask this because I know you've answered it a whole bunch of times, but if I don't ask it, somebody else will. Um, Planetary landings. You've talked a little bit about it, but can you kind of tell us about any potential plans for planetary landings and what sort of goals you need to meet to get there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, planetary landings is yeah, that is like the end goal. It's definitely what we want. We want to touch the ship down on a planetary surface, or just fly a shuttle down. Um, and explore that environment in a one-to-one way. Same as No Man's Sky. We want that experience for this game. Um, I want it. The community wants it, but there's a lot of development work there, and it's going to have to be something we look at post Kickstarter. So we need a bigger team. We need more developers. We need more artists, and it's not going to happen until we get that team that can make it happen. So that's basically where we are with that. But at the same time, I do have a fallback plan, and if we don't meet the goals on Kickstarter and we aren't able to expand the team anytime soon, then my fallback plan is to have an approach more like what you might see on Star Trek Online or the upcoming Starfield, where you have, say, several square kilometers of planetary surface, and you have a cutscene while you fly down in the shuttle, and then you can just walk around within that small area. And then we'd have maybe half a dozen landing zones on every planet, and we'd approach it that way. So, worst case scenario, we'll do that. If we get the funding, we'll go for full planetary landings in real time.
Well, that sounds really exciting. I know that's a big thing for a lot of players, and like I said, that's something I've seen you asked many, many, many times at this point now.
Yeah,
So I'm glad to hear that you do have plans for it, kind of regardless of what happens. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter, but I want to hold off on that until a little bit closer to the end, so that way you guys can plug that because obviously that's going to be a big point coming up for you guys here. Um,
sure.
Kind of prior to that point, while we're still talking about kind of the in-game stuff, I kind of wanted to go back a little bit and touch again on, I guess you could say it's kind of progression and stuff like that, but obviously with the initial release, you've talked about being a sandbox and very open-ended, as far as basically the player essentially is here on the ship, and your goal is just go out and explore. But can players expect to have any specific missions or anything granted by Earth or that come up on the ship on a day-to-day basis that need to be tackled?
So, in terms of missions aboard ship, there will be tasks that need to be performed continually. So, depending on what you choose as your role, there will always be jobs being generated that need to be performed, and those can be looked upon as your bread and butter. That's your day job aboard the ship. So, if you're an engineer, for example, you'll constantly have things that you need to go and do as an engineer. Maybe repair something, inspect something, tweak something. Um, so, those will be things to do. Um, with regards to missions for the ship as a whole, those are going to be given by the people you meet. So there's the standing, I guess there's the standing objective that you're given by Earth is to make as many successful first contacts as possible. The idea is to go out there, meet our neighboring races, and befriend them. So when you encounter an intelligent alien species and you hail them for the first time, there will be a multiple choice dialogue, and you'll have to use just a little bit of diplomacy to try and work out what is the best response to their questions and lead the conversation towards a successful outcome. Um, Not quite sure where I was going with that now. Sorry, what was the question again?
So as far as like specific tasks and from them, we'll always see,
Tasks.
yeah, missions, stuff like that.
Sorry, yes, of course. So, yes, and in order to befriend them, they may have something they want you to do. So, there could be just a simple, can you go and get something for us? Can you can you go and retrieve a certain amount of ore from some certain thing that we don't have? It could be, can you take this person somewhere? Or there could be some moral dilemmas, like you could meet a planet at war, and you have to decide, which side do you want to help, or neither. So there could be any manner of encounter that's generated by the system, and of course it will be procedural. So there are going to be hundreds of thousands of different civilizations in the galaxy, and there's just no way to do that manually. So there'll be a lot of focus on making sure that the procedural system is deep and has a lot of options, and you don't encounter the same thing twice. But that's where, at least for the sandbox, that's where the missions will come from.
And that actually perfectly segues into my next question, talking about the procedural aliens. So obviously, like you said just now, the aliens and the plants and everything is all procedurally generated. And I imagine creating a lot of aliens like that can be quite tricky. Having even just a dozen variants of different aliens, let alone potentially hundreds or thousands of aliens. What sort of differences can we expect as far as like aliens go? How varied are they going to be? Are they all going to be fairly humanoid, or are we going to see large differences between the aliens? And then will aliens be to specific systems, or can we see entire sectors of stars and parts of the galaxy that are just controlled by a single alien race?
Yeah, well, so in terms of the visual look of them, version one of that system, they're going to be different colored humans, essentially. But that's like literally just version one. As we progress, then they will get more and more diverse and weird over time. And one of the things we're actually planning to do is, once we have enough funding for it, that we can take on artists, their job will literally be to come up with new and interesting alien races, flora, fauna, technologies. We want an entire art department dedicated literally to do nothing else but to flesh the galaxy out with unique and interesting stuff. So, as a studio, we're committed to the galaxy and always having something new and different to discover, because there's the whole point of exploring is to find things that are new and interesting. And the danger with a procedural system is that everything becomes a bit samey and predictable. So we're absolutely fully committed to that not being the case. So all of our resources will be ploughed into making it as diverse as we can. And then just in terms of the sectors themselves, because the galaxy is generated on a sector by sector basis, this means that we can generate not just an alien species, but maybe an entire alliance of different alien species within a 100 light-year cube. So yes, it could be one or more planets from the same either single species or group of different species that all work together. So when you enter that sector, you'll have different relationships with them, depending on what type of sectors gets generated.
Okay, well, that sounds great to me, and it's definitely nice to hear that. Because obviously, like you said, one of the issues with procedural generation is that everything, like you said, gets a bit samey, and it can feel like you're just kind of going to the same places and seeing the same things over and over again. So definitely good to hear that your priority is to make sure that there's as much variation there as possible. And then, of course, the other thing being that, alien races aren't necessarily going to be just located on a single planet, and every planet you go to is going to 100% be a different alien race. That there's a chance you might encounter the same race or the same group of races on different various planets in a sector.
Yeah, absolutely. The goal here is to make the galaxy as much into a living, breathing, diverse community of different civilizations as possible. And we don't want, as you say, each planet to be right. That's this race, and then that planet's this race, and have them all be singular, isolated individuals. We do want to come across communities and alliances, and yeah, and as we move on to developing the DLC content, which will be the story-driven campaigns, At that point, we will implement handcrafted alien species. So we will have multi-sector spanning alliances from different alien races, and they'll have their own diverse histories and plots behind them.
Now, in terms of multiplayer here, we have obviously the ability to join games, and right now it's up to, I believe, 8 people that can join a game, or it's kind of the goal that you guys have at least for a base of 8, but there's a community looking to get at least like 200 people on the crew. What sort of
Yep.
limitations can we expect for multiplayer, and what does multiplayer look like in terms of roles and everything that people are going to be doing?
So the way the various departments on the ship are structured is off the top of my head, there are 7 departments. So you command, engineering, science, tactical, the deck crew, medical, and stewards department. And each of those departments will have a department head. Now, generally speaking, that will be the player if the player is in that department. And then you'll have a number of crew members in that department, which are the people that go around and do stuff. So there will be, per department, there will be a job sheet or a big screen on the wall that has all the jobs. Using engineering as an example, as wear and tear or damage is taken on the ship, then the most critical items will be automatically added to the job sheet. And then that NPC crew will just pick the top job on the list and go off and do it autonomously. For every player that joins, they will replace one of those NPCs. So, say there are 5 or 6 player engineers, then they will work from that same task list and just assign themselves the task and go and do it. Or the player in charge, the chief engineer, will assign that task to them. In terms of number, we've had 13 in a game before with no obvious issues. We have yet to find the upper limit, so challenge accepted, I think.
And I'm sure that's something you guys are going to have to balance as you continue to flesh out the ship and the other aspects of the game that are, of course, going to continue to impact performance, and that's going to obviously change probably the ultimate number of players that could join, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, with the way, I mean, it's a peer-to-peer host, so it's all down to the hardware and the network connectivity of the person hosting the game. So, if they've got 200 meg up and down, then they can probably support a lot of players on their server.
Now, yeah. So, what if, say, I want to have like 8 people just join the galley and all be stewards? I don't know how many slots of stewards you have, but what if more people want to join a specific area than there is actually crew members in that area? Is that something that's going to be possible, or will other players have to join different departments where there's still free slots?
Well, there is a passenger role. So under civilian, you've got things like passengers, ambassadors. Um, just because you are a role doesn't mean that you can't do other things on the ship, because everything's physicalized. If, say, a player was an engineer and wanted to help out in the kitchen, there's nothing physically preventing them from doing so. So they could go in there, grab a frying pan, and make some food. Um, the tools and the equipment used by each role are literally just tools and equipment. So just go and pick it up and use it.
Okay, so that's
So
excellent. So somebody can
yeah.
join your crew as a player, like as a passenger, like you said, and they don't
Mm.
necessarily have to replace any of your standard crew, and you could still have all your AI, but they'll actually still be able to come up to the bridge or go down to engineering and actually help out and actually interact with the ship and everything.
Yeah, there'll be no limitations on what they can do. So they can just, yeah, if they want to cook some food, cook some food.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. I had a couple of community questions from before I started the stream, so I wanted to ask you those questions on behalf of those people. One of
Sure.
the first questions I had is how hard will it be for the captain to operate the minute details of the ship for things like lighting on the ship and window polarization, some of the smaller things? Because obviously you've talked about having control panels for the major stations routed through to the captain's display that's here next to us, but
Yeah.
for smaller aspects, like yeah, like I said, the window polarization when you're coming up to a star, is somebody going to always have to get up and go over to the window every time you come up to a star, or how will that look like from the captain's perspective or in a solo play perspective?
So eventually, we'll have NPCs for every station on the bridge, and the idea as the captain, all you need to do is look in their direction, and we might make it middle mouse button, for example, and then that will bring up a radial menu with commands. So you look at them, press the button, issue the command, and they will perform that action.
Okay, so
Um,
that makes it a lot easier. Then you don't have to worry about doing basically everything yourself.
yes, yeah, and in general, the way the captain gameplay is supposed to work. If I grab a chair here, so right now we're looking at the output from the sensors. Now, the panel that currently has all the different alert modes on it, that's actually going to be the command panel for the holo display. So it's the command console that controls the holo display, not the individual bridge stations. So if we wanted to say switch it to tactical, then the holo display will show what the tactical console is doing, um, or the helm, or anything else. So the holo display, the whole purpose of that is to give the captain a three-dimensional view of what's happening on any of those particular bridge stations, so that they have a complete all-rounded view of what's going on, and then they can just issue commands, based on that.
Okay. So another question I got was, you've talked about the piloting of shuttles, resource miners and repair and stuff like that. Can we expect to see any sort of EVA on foot and activities like that, or boarding of external stations and stuff like that on foot as well?
Yes, there will be a number of different pieces of hardware that are on the external hull of the ship, and you'll need to actually repair those in person. So, or indeed replacing the hull plating. Although we'll probably use a little repair craft for that, the equivalent of a work bee kind of thing. Um, but yes, you'll be able to suit up and go stomping across the outer hull. Say one of the weapon turrets is damaged, you'll have to actually get out there and fix it on foot.
Okay, so we'll have like a limited number of spacesuits or something that we'll be able to put on and venture out onto the hull of the ship to conduct repairs on certain things that maybe the equivalent of the worker bee, like you said, isn't necessarily going to be ideal or well suited to actually doing those repairs or replacements.
Yeah, so when it comes to hull plating, obviously you need something bigger to carry off the hull plate and replace it. But for repairing, say, the sensors, because the sensors will be physically realized on the ship, then yes, you'll need to get out there and do it by hand. And right now there should be airlocks at the back where the shuttle bay is, and we're also going to add a couple around sea deck. So you'll have a room with suits in. You can suit up, go in the airlock and walk out onto the hull directly.
So we got another question here, and the person wanted to know: will there be team killing or friendly fire implemented into the game?
I'm going to make that a host option, so that'll be something that you can turn on or off as desired as the host. Because there is the opportunity for a lot of trolling, so someone will just join your server and just run around shooting everyone. Um, we will have a Briggs implemented, and the server host will be able to teleport players to the brig. Um, but yes, you'll be able to turn off friendly fire if you want to.
Okay, and you actually just in part answered my next question that they had, which was if those mechanisms are in place, which, like you said, they will be.
Yeah.
What sort of mechanisms will there be to punish team killers or griefers? And like you said, there's obviously going to be the brig. What sort of moderation tools or admin tools will the host have in order to deal with those people on, say, a more meta level, such as kicking or banning from the server?
Yeah. So we'll definitely have the ability to kick, and we will be able to ban via Steam ID. Because we're using the Steam platform, anyone joining the server is joining via their Steam ID. So we can ban at that level if need be. But yeah, the preferable option is just to teleport them to the brig, and once they're there, they won't be able to get out. So They can either be in there in a timeout or just choose to leave the server on their own.
Okay, excellent. So I wanted to kind of change up things here. We've been talking a lot about the game itself. I wanted to kind of talk about the back end of the game, the development side of things a little bit here before I set you free so you can get back to work finally.
Sure.
So I know realism is a very important aspect to you, and of course, many of the players, and it's a topic I've seen come up a few times. Obviously, like you said, everything you've put into the game or tried to put into the game has been inspired by either modern technologies advanced 200 years, what those technologies will probably look like. But it also extends to the stars and stuff like that, and the planets, the color gradients and stuff like that. Um, where do you try to strike the balance between realism and good gameplay? Like, what's the deciding factor on that, or how do you go about that?
Well, basically, that is the deciding factor. So it's going to be as realistic as it possibly can be until that becomes not fun. So, for example, the speed of the ship, um, it's moving at 570 light years an hour, because any slower than that, and you get into the realms of not fun. So, you want to be able to explore a reasonable number of star systems in one play session. So, if we were to make the ship move at a more leisurely pace, then that's not fun for the players. Things like artificial gravity. Um, it is taking that sci-fi trope a little bit too far, perhaps, away from what's realistic. But in terms of just game mechanics and gameplay, it's better all round just to have artificial gravity. And it's basically things like that. If having it real is just a chore, then we'll make it sci-fi.
Okay. So one of the things I you talked about in another stream was the fact that you've rebuilt the ship like 5 times. Is that correct?
About that, yeah, yeah.
What's the biggest challenge you would say you've really faced in developing so far? Would that be like designing the ship itself, or what would you say is your biggest challenge so far to this point?
I think it's more the physical layouts of the space. So I'm a big fan of Morphologist. I don't know whether you're familiar, but he does an architect reviews series on Star Citizen ships. And as an architect by trade, he will review those ships from the perspective of a trained architect. And growing up, I always wanted to be an architect before I got into IT. So architecture is something which is quite dear to me. So I'm approaching this project not just from the perspective of an engineer, but also that of an architect. So the rooms, the spaces, and the human traffic around the ship needs to make sense architecturally. So it's a good design. So there were times when initially when I first did the first prototypes, it wasn't actually a saucer back then. It was a lot longer and thinner as a ship design. And I found that the layout of the 200 odd crew quarters was actually quite problematic in a ship that shape. And it wasn't until I made it a saucer that I found that was the most compact, efficient way of getting 200 crew quarters into such a small area. So the shape of the ship has really evolved over time, depending on the architectural needs of the ship. Um, and then as I was building the electrical system and working out how that would work, I, I came across the idea of using it in a quadrant manner. So each deck is split into 4 physical quadrants, and the electrical system is isolated in those 4 individual quadrants. So you could lose an entire quadrant of the ship, and the other 3 quadrants would still have power without any interruption whatsoever. So it's just those learning some lessons and just tweaking things. And at one point, I think that the hardest thing I had to do was rotate the internals of the ship by 45 degrees in order to accommodate splitting it into these quadrants. And that probably set me back by a couple of months in terms of time, but definitely worth it in the long run.
Well, it's definitely very interesting, and yeah, I'm a big fan of Morphologists and the Architect Review series. So it's actually quite exciting to hear that that's actually kind of a point of reference for you too, and that that's something you're actually taking into consideration when designing the ship, and it actually adds kind of an extra layer that I personally wasn't even aware of until you just talked about it now. Um,
Yeah, and hopefully one day when it's finished, I'd love for him to do an architect reviews video on the Magellan class. I'd be fascinated to hear his thoughts on it.
well, I saw that you were in the Armco server, so it looks like you're already part way there, getting
Yeah,
into
yeah, my foot's in the door. Yeah,
it. So, in terms of kind of the back end of things, one thing you had briefly touched on here already was avoiding a certain sci-fi franchise. Now, you previously worked on a couple of different projects that are set in certain brand IPs that are very popular, and one of those actually got hit with a cease and desist. And I know that you're looking to avoid that, but that is a big point of concern. I've seen a lot of people voice that concern. So, what sort of steps are you guys taking to avoid potential copyright strikes or issues from any potential similarities stemming from that very well-known sci-fi franchise?
sure, sure. Um, well, I think the thing is, looking around the ship, there's not one single thing that you can point at and say that's from X, Y, and Z sci-fi show. Um, as I mentioned earlier, I mean the ship is inspired by all different kinds of sci-fi franchise. I Babylon 5 is perhaps my favorite of all sci-fis. So, that's very close to my heart. And, I love Trek and I love Star Wars, and I think there are elements of all of those. But in terms of IP lore and what can be copywritten, if that's the right word, um, you need to be able to show substantial similarity. And I hope so far nothing is the same enough to cause anyone to have a concern over it. Um, that the only thing I guess the problem is the external hull being saucer shaped and very similar to a Star Trek saucer, but that's being changed. And one of the things I'm going to be working on probably for most of November is completely redesigning the external hull. It will still be mostly circular in shape, but hopefully it won't look like a Star Trek circle. It'll look more like, I don't know, like Lost in Space, for example, one of those ships.
Okay,
But
well,
yeah,
yeah.
but,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, sorry, but beyond that, I don't. I think people would be hard pressed to single out any one thing and say that's from Star Trek or that's from Star Wars or whatever else. Um, and every piece of technology, every piece of lore, everything about the galaxy, everything about everything is based on real world technology and real world history and real world organizations. None of it, in fact, nothing in the game is directly based on any sci-fi franchise. It's all based on real world things. Um, so so yes, it's a starship with a bridge based on naval tradition, but it's all based on real world stuff, and that's our position on it. Although, yes, at the end of the day, we will have an IP lawyer cast their eye over everything just to be on the safe side.
Okay, well that's that's excellent to hear. And like I said, that's definitely something that I know that you guys have been working to make sure that you guys are very much your own design, your own assets. But like I said, there's a lot of people that that was a point of concern for. So I'm glad to hear that you guys pretty much have that on lockdown, and that you're confident that there's not going to be any issues there. Um, so then I wanted to talk kind of a couple things here before we wrapped up, and I guess I want to talk a little bit about funding and kind of your future plans for playtests and stuff like that. So I guess first of all, I want to start off. Now you've talked about Kickstarter and stuff like that and meeting your goals, but
Mhm.
you've stated an interest in getting other developers on board. Now, in the event that say you don't have the ability to meet those goals are higher on. If people are looking to devote time or just, volunteer efforts to the project, is that something you guys are willing to accept?
Um, I'm going to say no, and that may seem like an odd thing to say, but because this is a commercial product, and we have certain ideals we want to uphold, it's difficult to have a volunteer team come on board and work commercially on a product that they're doing so in a volunteer basis. I've worked with volunteer teams over the years, and one thing I've learned is that volunteers are just volunteers. They're volunteering their time. They work when they have time to work, and they have lives outside of the project that obviously they need to devote their time to. So we made the decision that if anyone is working on the project, they will be doing so under a proper contract, and they will be paid accordingly for that work. So yes, so there are people that have approached us. They've offered to help, but just for the good of the project and the good of the studio and the longevity of the game, we want to make sure that it's all managed properly and contractually.
And that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who might get a little bit frustrated at that idea where it's like, why would you not take any help you can get? But at the same time, speaking, like you said, making sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and that, at some point that's not going to come back and potentially hurt you if you take work from somebody for free and then they say, well, I didn't get compensated or something like that. That could definitely cause issues for you later on down the road.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know we also want to uphold a certain level of quality as well. And I'm not putting down people who are volunteering their help, because there are artists out there who are just doing it as a hobby who are absolutely exceptional at what they do. um, but there are also a lot that aren't, and it's often difficult to sift through and find the gems. um, and we find you're more likely to get the skill you need if you're paying them to do it.
Now, if an artist is interested in working with you guys, what's how would they go about approaching you guys? Is that something you guys would be willing to accept as like portfolios and stuff like that? How would be the best way if you guys are open to that?
Yeah,
How would the
absolutely.
best way be to approach you?
So yeah, either contact me or Claire on our Discord. If you've got a portfolio of work you've done and you're interested in working on the project, then yeah, absolutely. Fire us a portfolio and we'll take a look. Um, just be aware that if we take someone on, it will be a formal contract.
Okay. So yeah, and then I kind of wanted to talk about, I guess, to wrap up here, the plans coming up, because obviously you've got a roadmap set, and the roadmap's kind of changed around and shifted here and there, which is to be expected at this point. But more so specifically, February is kind of when we're looking to have the next playtest, I think, is the plan, and you guys are looking to participate in Steam Next Fest that time. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we were actually registered for Next Fest for October, um, but they changed the rules recently so that if you participate in one Next Fest, then you can't participate in any more. And they changed that rule quite recently. We didn't realize they changed it, so we pulled out of the October Next Fest in lieu of entering the February one, because for us as a studio, the February one is far more in line of where we need the public interest in the project, because we intend to follow up in March with the Kickstarter launch. So between now and February, over the next 3 months, there's going to be a lot of work focused on the external model, a proper trailer, the engineering systems, trying to get some actual gameplay implemented into the game, and try and make that February demo a lot more bulked out compared to what we've got right now for the playtest.
And yeah, kind of on the note of the Kickstarter, obviously that's a big point for you guys, and I know Claire's really been trying to drive home the Kickstarter, and it's kind of almost, again, sounds almost counterintuitive to say, but you guys are looking to kind of, if possible, try to have people hold off on supporting the project now so that they can back the Kickstarter so you guys can meet your goal. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone's looking to back the project and maybe they've got some money spare that they want to put into it, but that's all they can do. Yeah, absolutely. Please, if you want to back it, amazing. But March would be the time to do that because obviously we want to hit that Kickstarter goal. Because if we don't hit the goal, then obviously we get nothing. It's just the way Kickstarter works. So if you're planning to just back every month anyway, then absolutely please hit Patreon. It means a lot to us. But yeah, if you're just thinking of making a one-off, March would be the time to do that.
Okay, that's definitely good to know. And then yeah, as far as the next playtest, obviously, unfortunately, we didn't get or I didn't get to this video. I was a little bit under the weather here for a good while and wasn't able to get this video out earlier in the month. But you guys are nearly done with this playtest, at which point the game will go back to Patreon backers only for a time. And then
Yeah,
come February, it will be open once again to the public as a demo next time. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
We had some issues with releasing as a demo this time round. Um, as it turns out that with the way that the Steam platform works, if if you have a demo but you also own the actual game, you can't download the demo. So like we couldn't download it because we own the main game, and all the backers couldn't download it either. Um, but in order for the media push in February, it has to be a demo as per Steam's rules. So we're going to have to just jump through a few hoops. And so if anyone encounters that in February, just for the record, there is a workaround. You have to make a new Steam account, download the demo on the new Steam account, and then just go back to your main account and you can play on the demo. It's a bit of a pain, but that's how Steam have it set up.
okay, well, it's great that you guys have a workaround at least. So
Yeah.
that definitely helps out a lot. And I think that's more or less everything. Is there anything else you guys wanted to plug, or anything else you'd like to talk about on your end before I let you get back to your never-ending grind of work here?
No, only to say that the playtest is going to be available um, probably for an extra week because I've got the character customization that'll go live at some point over the next few days or so. And then after that, I want to do some updates on the sensors and maybe add some surface scanning to the planets. And what I'm planning to do is have the playtest end 7 days after the last patch goes in. So however long it takes me to make that patch, 7 days after that is when the playtest will end. And then yes, it's full steam ahead for February. And I would encourage everyone to join the Discord, check out the whip patch log because it's updated almost every single day. I'm slacking a bit over the past couple of days, but generally speaking, it's almost every day that it gets updated. So if you're interested in the project and you want to see the project grow and change over time, the Discord is definitely the place to be.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining me. And anybody who didn't catch the full video, this will be going up on YouTube at some point here, probably pretty soon. And then try to get that up in time so that people can view that during the playtest. And then, of course, if you guys have any questions or anything, the Discord for Starship Simulator will be in the YouTube information section. Dan and his partner Claire are very responsive and very open to the community, and they're always willing to talk and take on questions and stuff like that. And it's been absolutely wonderful being part of their community so far. So thank you again, Dan, for joining me. And if you're always welcome back if you ever want to talk more about the game.
Yep, it is my favorite subject to discuss, as Claire will tell you. So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to come back at some point.